Welcome in to the DRF College Sports Podcast. My name is Jack Fitzpatrick. I'm joined by the one, the only, the fantastic, what do we call that? Quarter button-up wearing sweatshirt from Costco. I have the same one. I almost
Pretty
wore
good
it
stuff.
today. That it would have been awkward if I wore that Eddie Bauer quarter button-up. But how are you doing today?
Good. My bracket's still perfect. I didn't think it would be at this point, Jack, but to have it be perfect is it's a thrill to say the least.
That's kind of amazing considering your best bets last week,
Yeah.
or I guess for the Sweet 16 went 3-6. So
That's
kind of amazing that your bracket is still perfect. If you ask me.
It is. I like to do that to throw people off the scent. And I do the bracket. It's just when I do on paper. I don't enter it in any pools or anything. It's just between me and the basketball gods. And
Yeah.
hey, it's perfect. You just got to trust me on that. I don't like to reveal my bracket picks until the tournament's over.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, because
Of course,
if not, people would have known that St. Peter's was going to the
right. Right. I don't want to bet on them because it feels almost like an unfair advantage, given how good my brackets tend to be. But no, it's been a wild tournament, and we're nearing Duke, North Carolina. Could happen.
There's a really strong possibility that's going to happen. UNC is playing out of their mind. I think they won like 10 of their last 12 coming into the tournament, and now they've gone on an absolute tear. That includes a win over Duke at Cameron Indoor in Coach K's final game. Right. That includes a fantastic game. That was probably the best game of like pure basketball of the tournament so far. That UNC UCLA game last night. They were hitting everything. Caleb Love was just out of his gourd. I don't think I've seen a kid play that on fire since I watched Gonzaga Duke earlier this season. It gave me shades of that, but an absolute fantastic game. UNC is in the Elite Eight. They're facing off against St. Peter's. That's going to be a really tough matchup for St. Peter's. We'll talk about that later on in the podcast. We'll start with kind of a recap of the Sweet 16, what we saw, what we liked, what we didn't like, how our best bets did. Not to brag or anything, but I did go 6-1. I'm looking pretty strong.
That's
the only thing I got wrong was Texas Tech. I was on them money line. I really thought they had that, but we'll go Sweet 16. We have a couple guests popping on, Sheldon Alexander and Matt Russell from the DRF Sports Podcast. They'll jump on. I know Sheldon wants to talk Gonzaga. Bennett's a Gonzaga apologist. Sheldon wants to clown the Bulldogs. So that's going to make for some great podcasting. I'm really looking forward to that. So what game do you want to start with the Sweet 16? Which one? Is it UNC UCLA? Is it another game that really sticks out to you that you just thoroughly enjoyed watching?
I thought Texas Tech Duke was also really good basketball. And some of this, when we say like really good, is just like shot making. Like there was something about North Carolina UCLA when UCLA was taking long twos where like the basketball side of me is like, what are you doing? Like you can't take
your
long
analytics.
Twos. Yeah, the analytics side. But then you watch them, like the way they shoot with some of those guys on the perimeter, and you're like, wow, UCLA's got some shot makers, even though they take a lot of, challenging shots. Caleb Love, it feels like a flip of a coin whether he's going to have a great game or look like he can't hit the rim. And he was doing that at the end of the game where he had shots that were like not even close. And then he was hitting clutch threes. He just doesn't seem to care. Maybe a light JT Note version, right? Where JT Note will shoot 40 times. He might shoot like 40 times against Duke today. It's going to be awesome. But I thought that game, the Texas Tech Duke game, was good. UNC UCLA was great. Houston, Ken Pom, take a bow. Looks like he got that one right. They're pretty good. So I thought it was a pretty enjoyable thing. And then, of course, St. Peter's, which I think both of us kind of assumed was done or running out of steam, comes out and beats Purdue. Zach Edey is very tall, but he had like 2 rebounds in that game. I don't know how you're 7-4 against St. Peter's and come away with 2 rebounds, man. That's terrible.
They looked nervous. Like the whole game, they never played loose. Jaden Ivey was a turnover machine. He never took the game over like people expected. Yeah, Zach Edey, you're 7'4". Their tallest guy is like 7'10". I mean, well, no, not 7'10", 6'10", or like 6'9", maybe.
Can you imagine?
Could you imagine a 7'10", 7'4" matchup in the Sweet 16? Zach Edey didn't come to play. Travion Williams put the team on his back there in the second half. They didn't score for the first 6 minutes of the second half, Purdue. And then Travion Williams went off for like 6 straight points, hit a 3 just clutch under the hoop lay-ins. But yeah, just not a good game from the Boilermakers. It was funny to me because all year we've been talking about Purdue as this team that offensively is a juggernaut. They're one of the best, if not the best offensive team in the nation. and they're one of the worst defenses. They were like sub 100 in Ken Palm in terms of defensive efficiency. And then all of a sudden in this game, they hold St. Peter's to like 65 or something and like had a fairly good defensive showing. Their offense just didn't show up.
67-64. Purdue was 5 of 21 from 3, which is not very good. They were fine from 2, and they got to the free throw line a little bit. But they also had 15 turnovers.
Yeah.
Jaden Ivey, you mentioned him. He had 6. Zach Edey had 5 turnovers. Zach Edey really was not good, which is like early on he had a huge dunk, and I was like, oh, wow, he's 7'4".
Yeah,
they're not going to be able to contain him. And it's just not how it played out at all. He was not good. He had 2 rebounds, 5 turnovers. He had 11 points because they couldn't really stop him when he got the ball down low. But they're, forced enough turnovers to slow him down. And St. Peter's was only 6 of 21 from 3. They weren't great from 2 either. They were awesome at the free throw line, and they didn't turn it over a ton. But it wasn't like St. Peter's played this incredible game that I feel like they did against Kentucky. This one didn't seem that impressive, at least from an offensive showing. But defensively, they were solid, found a way to win. And yeah, I don't like the matchup with North Carolina at all. But I also didn't like the matchup with Kentucky or Murray State or Purdue. So it's hard to get a feel for them.
I think at this point, we just have to accept that St. Peter's is like they haven't been a good team all season, but they are now playing like a good team, like as one unit. And they're playing their style of basketball, imposing their will on these blue bloods, on these 7'4" kids. On like St. Peter's isn't a fluke at this point. And it's weird to say that.
Yeah, they're playing well. They're playing well enough to win games. I also do think a lot of it is like mental. Like I think if you've got Purdue or Murray State or Kentucky playing St. Peter's in like December 8th, I think they've probably got a good chance of beating them, but it feels like they're getting so tight in these games where St. Peter's doesn't flinch down the stretch. Whereas I feel like Purdue, I think they were up 4 with like 5 minutes left and couldn't hold on. I think some of that is they kind of got tight and really struggled late.
Yeah. Any other games that really stuck out to you in the Sweet 16 that you want to take a deep dive into?
I mean, Gonzaga losing, which it sounds like we'll get to more later, but Arkansas's defense, man, they're very legit. They were good in the first 2 games. The offense has still not really looked good for them, but the defense was really, really good against Gonzaga. Kind of surprised at how the Zags guards just sort of fade.
Yeah.
I think there's been this like narrative that Drew Timme is sometimes soft when things aren't going well. I thought he actually played the best of anyone there. Chet Holmgren had some ticky-tack fouls on him, which didn't help. But like Timmy's the one guy that really creates his own shot. You look at the guards; they got some open threes and weren't making them, but they don't do a great job like getting their own shots or really knocking down threes maybe as consistently as you'd like against good teams. It's a spot where like Corey Kispert would have been nice, right? Like last year, he was the guy that could get you a bunch of threes in spades, and now they can't do that nearly as much. So it was kind of jarring to see them like get down. It was a little bit like the Baylor national championship, not quite as much, but where they get down, you're like, oh, like they're Gonzaga, they're so talented, they'll punch back, and they just like never did.
Do you want to hear an interesting stat about Arkansas?
Go for it.
In their last 5 games, they're shooting just 39.4%, and opponents are shooting 40.8%. Yet over that time period, they're 4-1 straight up.
That's awesome.
So it's just very interesting that, I mean, they also outshot Gonzaga 70. They put up 72 shots against Gonzaga. Gonzaga only got 64 up. And I'm saying only, like, that's not a huge number, but just kind of impressive that Gonzaga is the best team in the nation. They played a fast tempo, and Arkansas still managed to outshoot them by 8.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Gonzaga; they turned it over 15 times.
Yeah,
Nembhard and Timme both had 5 turnovers. Like they did a great job forcing turnovers on those different guys. Only turned it over 8 times themselves. Yeah, they didn't shoot it well at all, and some of that is JT Note taking 29 shots. I think he made.
Hey, don't disrespect my man. Don't disrespect JD Note. He was a bucket.
There was some tweet that somebody had that was like Gonzaga's guards, like multiple guards, were like 8 of 30, and then they're like, in fairness, JT Note was 9 of 29. It's like he was shooting like he was 4 guys out there, man. Every time he rolls down, he knocks it down. And then of course he had the one like near the wing where he makes this like off balance 3, and people are like, Note. And it's like the shot was sweet, but it's also like when you take 45 of them, you think some of them got to be cool, right? And go down.
I think he was taking Jalen Williams was hot. He was 40% from three. Jalen Williams was
Mhm.
looking good. And Note just probably took like 10 shots from him. Like probably could have made that extra pass. And instead Note was like, I'm pulling up.
Jalen Williams is also a flop machine. I think
Yeah.
he's taken 50 plus charges on the season. Don't love
Yeah.
it for a big guy, but he does it. If you're gonna call it, if that's the way the rule is called, I guess you gotta like him there. But he's been awesome defensively in part because he's able to take charges, but he does a really nice job against like talented bigs. I thought he was good when he was going up against Timmy and company, and then he was really good, I thought, against Ryan Davis of Vermont and kind of neutralizing what Davis is able to do. So he's been good this tournament.
And then another one seed went out that same night. Arizona lost to Houston. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned it earlier. Ken Pom take a bow. Fantastic game from Houston. And I like them against Villanova. I guess this is where we'll kind of transition over to some Elite Eight talk.
Sure.
Our guests will be coming on at around 12:30. So in about 15 minutes, we'll jump back into Gonzaga, talk a little bit about that, and talk about some value, best bets, things of that sort for the Elite Eight. But we'll talk a little previewing some of these games from an X's and O's standpoint. First up, it's going to be Houston against Villanova. They tip at 6:09, not 6:10, 6:09
Important to
tonight
note.
Eastern. Do you know why they do it at 9?
I don't know. I don't know exactly why they do the weird times the way that they do, where they say 6:09 instead of 6:10. Not sure on that. It's weird. I guess what is it? It's also TBS tonight and then CBS tomorrow instead of the
Yeah.
dueling that they usually do. Yeah.
So Houston is a favorite, 3-point favorite against Villanova tonight. I love Houston. I've fallen in love with them. They took down Arizona. I wrote a preview on drfsports.com or drf.com/sports, breaking down this Houston Villanova game, all these betting angles. Houston's good, man. Houston's good.
Yeah, they're really good. I kind of like the spot for them too. So I would lean that way. I think that'll be a pick that I go with is the Houston spread. I think they're so good on both ends, and Villanova's really good on both ends too. But I just feel like the defense, the way that Houston defends twos and threes effectively, to me that's really good. You look at Villanova; they don't turn it over a lot, but Houston's offense does a good job taking care of the ball, and they also are really good at offensive rebounding, which is actually one of the few weaknesses of this Villanova team. Is they don't sometimes they give up some offensive rebounds. They don't block a ton of shots defensively. Houston really doesn't get shots blocked. I just feel like they're going to get so many shots up and then get a bunch of extra offensive rebounds that I feel like they'll have more possessions. But that's just my initial feel.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I also am not that high on Villanova. They're a really good team. They're consistent. They're always going to be around. But I think Houston's a better team overall from top to bottom. The loss of Sasser back in December, you thought that would derail them, but now they've come out and they have like 4 guys averaging double figures. They're just a really solid team from top to bottom. 8th most efficient offense, 10th most efficient defense. The Cougars are for real. Kelvin Sampson is a great coach. You kind of questioned why they got a 5 seed. Granted, they only played Bryant. That was their only tournament team that they played coming into the tournament. But now
Well,
they've
sorry, just to interrupt. That's the only one they had beaten. They'd played like 4 or 5 and lost to them. So
okay.
there was like legitimate complaints, right? But they were really close losses. Like Alabama was a point, Wisconsin was 2 points, and then a couple double-digit losses to Memphis. So people were like, "Oh, maybe they're a little inflated." But then you watch them play, and it's like, how the hell did they lose to Memphis twice?
Yeah. So there's all those questions coming around it going into the tournament, but now
Yeah,
they've knocked off UAB. I don't recall a large chunk of time where they have trailed this tournament because they destroyed UAB. They seemingly, I think they won wire to wire against Illinois. Then against Arizona, they controlled a good majority of that game.
yeah, that'll be interesting to see if Villanova can get them, behind the 8 ball a little bit, so to speak, and take a lead and maybe put them behind and see if they can add that pressure. But they've looked fantastic. They've probably been the most impressive, in my opinion, impressive tournament team because I thought Illinois was pretty good. Maybe I
Yeah.
was overhyping them. And then I thought Arizona was going to bounce back out of the TCU game. Instead, Houston just kind of bodied them the entire game. I mean, they're really good. They rebound well, they defend well. It's an impressive group.
maybe one of my best bets, and little preview here for the best bets coming up at the end of the podcast. I like the under in this game. It's currently 127. That's come down a point from 9 o'clock this morning. 9 o'clock this morning, it was at 128. But two of the slowest teams in the country. So
this is true. That's an interesting total because they've got some efficient offenses, but they move pretty slow. So that'll be fun to track. Also, maybe worth noting if you're looking spread or money line, you look at these games, you assume neutral site or the location kind of leaning toward the better seed. Games in Texas. Game is in San Antonio, Texas. Houston fans were pretty rowdy during the win over Arizona. Got to think they've got a little bit of a geographical fan advantage over Villanova despite being a 5 seed.
Nice little nugget there.
Yeah, I turned on that Houston Arizona game. I was like, why are there so many Houston fans? And I was like, oh right, it's in San Antonio.
Do you want to hear another crazy stat?
Yes.
Houston's 9-1 on neutral courts this season, and when they're a neutral court favorite, they're 8-1 against the spread.
That's impressive. That's some good stuff. Yeah, they've had some really good neutral court showings, right? They've won 6 in a row on neutral courts, and they were, I think, all by double digits. Yeah, they blew out people in the conference tournament. They've been dominant in the NCAA tournament. They had a double-digit neutral site win in December over Oklahoma State. They beat Oregon by 30 in November. And then I think the one neutral site loss was to Wisconsin, where I think they were getting crushed at halftime, if I'm not mistaken, in that game. Yeah, they were. I think they were down like 40-20, and they end up losing the game by 2. So
another fun tidbit, in like these low scoring grinded out games when the total's between 120 and 129.5, both teams have just one loss against the spread. So a combined 2 losses against the spread in these types of games.
Well, there you go. It's going to overtime.
Going to overtime, and it's still going to hit the under. Both teams' last 2 games have gone under the total.
And Houston will cover. So it's going to overtime at like 40-40.
Yeah. This is UVA North Texas all over again. Speaking of UVA, your Bonaventure bet did hit. Your best bet from last week, it did hit. So congratulations on that NIT. Quick side note, as they're in the final four.
Horrible because I think I'm probably like 8 to 10 games under 500 during the NCAA tournament, and I'm 2-0 on NIT plays. So the tournament that matters, I'm dominating.
Yeah, you and Matt can talk about it all you want. They had a NIT picks on their last podcast. I think he went 2-0 in those picks on the Wednesday NIT games. So if you guys just want to take over this podcast and turn it into an NIT, we can get NIT stew on and really just go balls to the wall in terms of NIT. Who needs the NCAA tournament?
Nobody.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to stop watching.
Second game tonight to get us back onto the NCAA tournament, the one that matters. Arkansas Duke tonight. Okay, so all the money, not all the money, 65% of the bets are on Arkansas +4 or plus the points.
Right.
Only 35% of the public is on Duke. I wrote a preview on this, drf.com/sports. Sorry to keep plugging. And I wanted to go Arkansas money line, right? Mm-hmm. I wanted it so bad that I looked at where the public was, and I have to fade the public here. Also, it just feels like it's Duke UNC. We're going into that narrative. It's the spot. It's all of that. So I'm going Duke -4, but there was a really, really strong part of me that wanted Arkansas +155 money line.
I like Arkansas spread in this spot because I had seen different numbers depending on the book with the public. So I had seen a BetMGM person who works over there, who works in data.
John Ewing?
Yes, it was John Ewing. And he had tweeted.
I feel like he's a really prominent betting.
He is. I want to make sure I had his thing, but it's data and PR for BetMGM. He had 61% of the tickets and 68% of the handle on Duke spread. And the line had dropped from 4.5 to 3.5. So the line was moving toward Arkansas, but the money or the majority of like the tickets and things were on Duke. So I like Arkansas spread here. I also think that everyone is going to buy into the narrative that Duke, North Carolina is going to happen. And I don't mean it could happen, but I like Arkansas in this spot. I think they're capable of winning outright. And I also think they're capable of losing by like 2. So I kind of like the spot for Arkansas just because I feel like Duke has shot out of its mind at the end of games against Michigan State and Texas Tech. And were still single-digit wins. They beat Texas Tech by 5. They didn't miss for like the last 5 minutes of the game. So I think Arkansas can be in this game, especially if Note like doesn't shoot 30% on 35 shots.
That's a really good point. But over the last 5 games, Duke has been out of their mind, shooting 52% from the floor. Both of these teams are 2-3 against the spread over their last 5, 4-1 straight up, though. So it'll be a really good matchup. I'm also not high. Like, all of my thoughts give me Arkansas money line because I'm not high on Paulo Banchero. Like, Duke is just such a Jekyll and Hyde team. I think they're 17-17 against the spread this season. They're not consistent. They've covered their last 2. I feel like this is at least a cover for Arkansas in this spot. But Arkansas has also been like the Goliath killer this season, taking down Auburn, taking down a lot of really good teams, especially during that huge winning streak they had where they were like undefeated against the spread in February. I think JT Note, Jalen Williams will give Duke problems, and I think their defense will really frustrate Banchero, Williams, Griffin, all of them. This isn't a best bet, and I'm not betting this game because I want Arkansas money line, but my head tells me Duke -4. So this is just a complete stay away.
I like the Arkansas spread. I'll probably end up tossing that in, although I'm actively rooting against that. I really want to see Duke, North Carolina in the Final Four.
That was the other part of me. Like, I don't want to put a bet down on the opposite side of what I want to. Like, Duke UNC would just be electric in the Final Four. Granted, so would Arkansas St. Peter's. You tweeted something last night that had me rolling when you were like, will the world burn if it's like, what will happen if it's Arkansas?
This is what people are looking for, right? It's a showdown. You got one coach who's moving elsewhere. The big showdown where it's, if it was Duke, North Carolina, Coach K retired, but Shaheen Holloway seems to already like have an office at Seton Hall for that job. So it's going to be an interesting thing. St. Peter's is fun to watch. I will say, I think if you had St. Peter's Duke in the Final Four, would still get a lot of attention and like interest. If you had North Carolina Duke, it would obviously be a huge deal. Arkansas is a huge buzzkill. If you're like a national media member, you're probably gonna be sad if Arkansas wins. If you like Arkansas, North Carolina, when you could have had Duke, North Carolina, is such a bummer. Obviously, Arkansas fans will probably be upset about that, but like that's a bummer.
Yeah, I think any combination that doesn't include Arkansas, people will love.
Yeah. So if Duke wins, like that Final Four game is going to be incredible because it'll either be St. Peter's as a 15 somehow making the Final Four trying to end Coach K's career, which is hilarious. Or you would have Duke, North Carolina both playing well. First time they've ever met in the NCAA tournament. That'd be huge. And then if that's the case, I'm taking whoever gets out of the other side and plays the Duke, North Carolina winner in the national championship. I would fade Duke, North Carolina. The emotional high, to come off that 2 days later sounds just brutal.
Yeah, 100%. Moving to Sunday now. You got Miami. You got Kansas. I think I like Miami +6 here. The line's +6 early. Kansas -250 on the money line. I like Miami +6 because Kansas, while they've been winning, they haven't been covering, and they've gotten out to these slow starts. Outside of their Texas Southern win, which they won 83-56 and covered the 21.5-point spread, couldn't cover and almost lost to Creighton. Couldn't cover and almost lost to Providence. I think Miami can probably take advantage of some of that and on the quick turnaround. I think Kansas wins, but at +6, I think Miami can keep it within 5. What are your thoughts?
That one's an interesting one because I think it's like Miami's matchup against Iowa State. That was the game I was probably highest on. And then maybe Providence too. And those both ended up coming through. Obviously, a lot of the others did not. But I kind of like the matchup for Kansas. Yeah, 6 others. I kind of like the matchup for, and then of course the other win was the NIT bet, LOL. But Kansas, the matchup for Kansas, I think is good. So they're one of the better offensive rebounding teams in the country. That's an area where Miami really struggles. They're one of the better effective field goal percentage teams. That's an area where Miami's defense struggles. Miami's defense is really good at creating turnovers, which is where Iowa State was terrible. They turned the ball over a lot, and they're not particularly good at shooting. We talked about their offensive struggles kind of at length on the last podcast.
They didn't break 60 again. And I think it's worth mentioning. They did not break 60 for the breaks. Okay, so they broke.
It was 70-56. So yeah, they didn't.
What, like 4 games in a row, 5 games in a row? Iowa State failed to break.
Yeah, 4 in a row, and they were every NCAA tournament game they were in. I think they averaged like 56 points for the NCAA tournament in 3 games. Somehow go 2-1 as an 11 seed. So I mean, they play good defense, but what they do really well defensively, Iowa State was forcing turnovers, and Miami just doesn't really turn it over. So I thought it was a a good matchup, and it kind of turned out that way with Charlie Moore had 9 assists compared to 3 turnovers, right? They kind of beat him up a little bit in that regard. So I just don't think this matchup is quite as good for Miami. I think it's a tougher one. I think Kansas will win, and I would consider having them covered just because I think their strengths are kind of aligned with maybe some weaknesses for Miami.
Yeah. All right. So Sheldon and Matt have joined us, and we're just jumping right into this. How are you guys doing today?
Wow.
First off,
Jumping right in. I'm good. I mean, I'm all right. Recovering from the madness that has been upon us the last couple of weeks, but I'm good.
The quad box,
Matt, how are
boys. I love it. Let's go.
Yeah, wow.
yeah, this is the first 4 box I've seen ever with StreamYard. So I want to jump right into it because we were teasing it before. Gonzaga. We got a Gonzaga apologist. Let me try and point here, and then we have a non-Gonzaga apologist down here, kind of over here. I can't point it. So, Sheldon, first off, I just want to say, what was your reaction when Gonzaga actually lost to Arkansas?
It's just simply like we can't be surprised, right? Like Gonzaga lies to us every single year. And I know that they made it to the final last year. I get that. And it was a great performance by them in the Final Four to get to the final. And you can't rip on a team for getting to the final. I understand that. But there's no reason, even when they got to the final and they were like 5-point favorites in that final against Baylor, and everyone sat there and we said, I remember talking to Matt about it last year, like, that's a ridiculous line, right? Like, Baylor definitely can win this game, and for Gonzaga to be favored by that much, it's just a normal, regular, just Gonzaga being overvalued. That's all. I'm not saying that they're not a good team. I'm not saying that they're not one of the best programs in the country. I'm just saying that they're overvalued every single year. And I will continue to fade them every time they play against an actual good team in the tournament.
Did you fade them against Memphis?
Yes. Oh, yeah. We talked about that, them going against Memphis. And in that game, I thought Memphis, especially once we talked about, is that Amani Bates's music, right? Like what's going on here? It's just a different weight class, right? And styles make fights, styles make basketball games. And Gonzaga, the conference they play in, like the reality is their conference just isn't that good. And I have an honest question to you guys, right? You guys watch way more college basketball than I do. So I'll give you guys that for sure. So I'm going to actually ask you guys this question genuinely, because I want to know the answer. If Gonzaga played in like the ACC, or if they played in like, okay, maybe not even the ACC, like just pick another conference, the SEC, like where are they ranking every single year in that conference? Are they one of the top teams in that conference, or are they like a middle of the pack team? Like, what do you guys think?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it depends on the year somewhat too, right? Because they started their rise as a mid-major. I've seen a lot of people pull out the stat that like I think they're 2-13 against top 4 seeds or something since 2001. In 2001, though, they'd be like an 8 seed going up against a 1. They'd lose by 2. So that one's like a little out. But yeah, they're definitely a little bit overvalued recently, I would say. But I also still think if they were in some of those leagues, and it's hard too because they're in Washington. So if they did it geographically, it'd be like the Pac-12, which
okay,
how much better is it? I don't know.
Conference of Champions, man. Conference of Champions.
So I think they'd still be at the top at a lot of those leagues. Like this year, they played UCLA in November and they beat them by 20 on a neutral floor. So I still think they beat them last year in the NCAA tournament as well. So I do think they'd be at the top of those leagues, but I can understand the argument that some people have of, you go through these battles and it would test them and help them in the NCAA tournament. I don't disagree with that, but I also think, they played in 2 of the last 5 national title games. They've made 7 consecutive Sweet 16s. It's not really like they're struggling in March. It's just that it's probably hard to get through and win the national title. And that's the one thing that is absolutely missing from their resume, though.
Yeah, isn't that the key thing, Bennett? Right? Like this tournament's really hard. It's really hard to get through, right? And we give Arizona a pass because they lose in the Sweet 16. And so what? They're going to go to the Pac-12. They're going to go to the Big Ten so that they can win it. Hold on a sec. Not since 2000 and not since 1997. Like, congratulations, Pac-12. You've got 12 teams. Big Ten's got 14 teams. And they're not winning anything either, right? And Gonzaga's just one squad. So, like, you're always going – I shouldn't say you're always, but you're often going to be right when you're going to tell me that this team can't win a championship. right? You're going to win that bet a lot of the time. So just this idea, like, yes, on an individual basis, we talk all the time this year, like looking at a point spread, it's like Gonzaga should be a 12-point favorite. They're a 16-point favorite in this game. But when they play these games that, they're playing Loyola Marymount and, Santa Clara's and stuff, it always looks more impressive because the depth of Gonzaga, they can sit their guys with 15 minutes left and the point spread, in the game expands. They end up winning that game by 20 because even the backups are better than those teams, right? And it'd be great to watch them in conference play against any of. I'd throw Mountain West into the mix, throw them in there so we get to see them against, Wyoming, Colorado State, San Diego State, et cetera. But I don't know, is that any different than playing BYU, St. Mary's, and San Francisco every year? Those teams are still making the tournament and making at least, a modicum amount of noise, right? We don't know what would have happened if San Francisco had won that overtime against Murray State. Maybe they do better than Murray State did against St. Peter's, and they advance into the Sweet 16, and who knows how far they go, and all of a sudden the WCC gets a little bit more credit from year to year, right? And so most wins in the tournament in the last handful of years, you mentioned how the evolution of Gonzaga. You know what? I only really kind of look back and go, okay, 2017 was the first year for me of this, this version of Gonzaga, because you could make the case that Gonzaga was, listen, they're always overrated, so to speak, but you could make the case, the Kevin Pangos Gonzaga teams, we're really going to, go back to that version, Kelly Olynyk running the show in the WCC.
Why we got to crush the Canadians? Why we got to crush the Canadians?
Why their first doesn't come to mind off the top of my head. We're really going to associate those with the versions of teams that had Zach Collins. And I sat there in Arizona at that Final Four and watched the referees absolutely rip that game away from Gonzaga. And it wasn't that different from Chet Holmgren getting into foul trouble and eventually fouling out this past week, right? It was that same sort of deal with Collins and Holmgren almost being kind of the same player, at least from a NBA prospect standpoint. And then, they ran into the one team that could beat them last year in the final after they had played, obviously an all-time classic against UCLA. And so it's funny, right? Yes, they are overvalued on a game-to-game basis. They cover a lot of games because of the matchups in the WCC. And Shell's right, if you faded Gonzaga every single game, even before they started playing real teams, they were 0-3 against the spread, right? You did well. And they could have been 0-6 against the spread and still won the national title because they would have been the favorite in every one of those games. And if it was all so easy, right, we'd all be rich, just piling money every year into fading Gonzaga on a game-to-game basis. But I know maybe we're just too dumb to do that, but we're not doing that. And that's... as it transitions to going forward, does it mean they're never going to win? Honestly, maybe. Because if you had told me when Mateen Cleaves was hoisting the trophy back in 2000 that the entire Big Ten was just going to never win ever again, basically, I would have said, that's crazy. What are you talking about? Look at all the roster of teams here, right? Same thing with the Pac-12. UCLA, Arizona, et cetera, et cetera. So, you throw all, 26 some odd teams in that, and we're going to compare and beat up on Gonzaga, and we're going to tell them that they should go play in a conference with those 26 teams who aren't doing anything anyway? The whole thing sounds a little insane to me, doesn't it? And so...
No, I go the other way.
By any means, but, even still, you see people just piling in on Gonzaga on their bracket, right? It's 37, 40%, something along those lines, that had them winning the title. And so as much as I'm sort of defending them here, I'm you can't take, they're not a 40% chance that they win this thing, right? You can't take them to win the title because you can't have that level of pressure, so to speak, from a, ratio financial standpoint on one team because it's just not fair. And so the whole thing with Gonzaga just really isn't fair, but this is sports and you know what? Life isn't fair. And so we'll take, and listen, Shell and I were both fading Gonzaga the whole way. I was on Georgia State, I was on Memphis, and I was certainly on Arkansas. And so you just go, okay, we got our money out of what we needed to do with Gonzaga, and whether that had anything to do with them winning or losing didn't really matter because this is a point spread business, right? And so you're going to keep overvaluing that team. And it's funny, once they got out of the WCC, once they got out of Georgia State, those next games those are pretty fairly priced games from comparing their point spreads throughout the season, right? So part of it is like you watch the WCC and it's like this team's a train wreck, this team's a mess, this team's got a new coach, and like Mark Few's just rolling the ball out for his guys, and they're just killing teams. And so yeah, like when it goes from the WCC from a point spread standpoint to, like Shell would say, real teams, like that's where you take advantage from a point spread standpoint. But as far as winning games and winning the tournament, man, like look at the streets out there, man. They are littered with top-ranked teams that have gone out in more like aggressively embarrassing ways. The Kentuckys, the Purdues. I don't mean to pick on teams that played St. Peter's, but you know what I mean? Like that's the tournament. There was 20 teams that could have won this tournament, and we're down to like, I mean, 8, but like let's be honest, maybe 6 or 7 that are actually capable of winning the tournament. There's a lot of.
Why can't St. Peter's win?
I think Kansas is the one that probably won't win. I think St. Peter's is the betting favorite. If I was making the line, I'm giving St. Peter's. Doug Eatert's mustache holds a lot of power that I don't think we're not putting into the lines correctly.
But here's the thing. No. Like my thing with Gonzaga is the thing that I find not fair is that every year they come in and they're handed a 1 seed or like the first overall seed or the second overall seed. And that's unfair because of the competition they play. So if you take one of those random teams from the Pac-12 or the Big Ten, and let's say Arizona, and we were told every single year Arizona is the number 1 seed because they played in the WCC and they were able to win easily against St. Mary's every single year. And then we're being told are a top team every single year. That's the part to me that is unfair because they keep getting overvalued as a top seed.
It's not unfair, right? They are earning this seed every year, right? They are taking on whomever they can play, right? They're like Duke in Nevada, let's go. Like we'll go play anybody anywhere, right? But Duke's not inviting them to Cameron Indoor, right? They are playing as much as they can. Like even last year's season, like you look at the non-conference schedule, and for those who just tune in February and see them playing Santa Clara every week, like that's fine. But like tune into November and December, and it's like, oh man, they're just playing Texas, Alabama, and Duke next week. It's like all 3 of those in like 8 days, and you're like, they're trying, and like that's why we have metrics and these sorts of things to show like this isn't. Again, I'm going to reference Kevin Pangos or Kelly Olynyk, where it's like, yeah, they finished 14-2 in the WCC. And it's like, how did they lose 2 games in the WCC and still get this spot? They are wiping the floor with the WCC, right? Like, yeah, they might go to BYU, they might go to St. Mary's and take a loss every 3 years, but they wipe the floor with that conference every year, and it's reflected in the metrics. And like, you can't just use the metrics.
But what would Arizona? But what would Arizona or UCLA do in that same position? That's more so my point. Right? Like we can crush Michigan and
Arizona
say like
was the 2nd overall seed, like probably the same thing.
It would be every single year though. If Arizona played in that conference or if Michigan played in that conference or whatever crappy
Arizona's football team is so bad, they should just relinquish football altogether, move to the WCC, and we might have something because let's be honest, you want to talk about fairness, this whole thing is based on football. It's the reason Gonzaga is not in the Pac-12 is because they don't have a football team to be in the Pac-12, and we haven't figured out a way around that just yet, sadly, right? And then
you could just
that's the whole reason why this isn't happening, right? It has nothing to do with they're afraid to go in the Pac-12 or anything. Mark Few would love to go into the Pac-12 because that would mean he no longer has to play Duke, Texas, and Alabama on neutral courts in the span of a week in December and be judged on that, right? That early on the season on a team that often has turnover because, as I mentioned,
I think he was gonna say a team that has turnover because they send guys to the league now. But I also think that overvalues them as well. But hey,
they're an interesting test case because they do their damage early. And then it's hard to assess how much it means to not have, I guess, the same level of competition as a power squad has early. Because like last year, their start was crazy where they beat Kansas, Auburn, West Virginia, and Iowa in their first 4 games. I think 3 of those 4 by double digits. I remember UVA scheduled them because I was on the UVA beat. So they play in Texas and UVA loses by 23 and almost gave up 100. And Tony Bennett was like shell-shocked, his defense giving up 98. So they're crazy, but at the same time, they definitely get – like I know some people are like, oh, you don't think they lose more games in the Big Ten or something? Well, of course they would lose more games. Like if you make them go on some of these road trips and things like that. So it's interesting. I do think they'd probably benefit from playing in a bigger league and they'd they'd probably enjoy it. But at the same time, it's so hard to critique them when I don't know if people would have the same argument if in 2017, the national title, the game where they lose to North Carolina by 6, if they win that game, is this even a topic on the podcast? Probably not.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's totally fair. And that was a great game.
For dying on you there, boys. Yeah, all I was going to say was about the 2017 was that was the first year they started getting like top level recruits in NBA town. I don't know if you guys were sort of talking about that, right? And so it's like 2017.
Children knew that right where that was going.
18 and 19, that they don't, but they lose to like really good teams. There was no true upset situation. And then obviously last year, Jalen Suggs, et cetera. And then this year, and again, more top level NBA type talent. Will they be able to keep that going? I mean, who knows, right? Like
Chet won't stay in school, but he should stay in school.
He's got to add it. He's so good. He's a unit. My thoughts on Chet Holmgren change every game that I watch, kind of like with Banchero. Like watching Banchero against Chet in the early season when it was Duke Gonzaga in that game, I was sold on Banchero, and now you can game plan Paolo out of the game so easily. Moving from all of that Gonzaga,
I was just going to say quickly, I wonder if Chet's too bulky, if he needs to drop 20 pounds or something and really slender out.
He needs to lean up.
Yes. Change the diet.
All of that fantastic Gonzaga chat. Nothing starts a Elite Eight round like breaking down Gonzaga and their worthiness of it all. Do you guys have a favorite play for the Elite Eight? Is it St. Peter's? Is it Doug Eatert's mustache? Are they making it to the Final Four? Is it? I'm trying to think of another one.
I only have one bet that I have so far for the Elite Eight, and so if you guys want to touch on all of them, I'm happy to, because I have a live betting strategy for one and a couple other situations. I don't know what to do, by the way. I'll tell you my one bet isn't. It's St. Peter's and that game. Like, I have no idea what to expect from that game. The line is obviously has been skewed out of whack because of the last week and a half. That game, I mean, listen, they were 17.5 to Kentucky, and now they're 8. I think it went up for all of the St. Peter's money that's coming in, by the way. Like, it went up a half point to 13 against Purdue. It is now up to 8.5 in a lot of places against North Carolina. But yeah, like a week and a half ago or whatever, it's 17 to Kentucky, and now it's going to be 8. Like, there's 9 points difference between Kentucky and North Carolina. Like, I'm sorry, there just isn't, right? But they've played so well that, like, metrically, they have shifted everything that they probably should be about an 8-point underdog in this game. And so I don't want anything to do with that game. The one bet that I've made, hopped on it immediately, because even though the number is fair, Miami plus 6.5 for me is just implicitly like a bet that just needs to be made. Now, I am sitting here as a Kansas future holder from literally the first day of the season, 20-1, and I'm sort of like just defending that at this point as like the Providence Friars are coming at me at all angles, and I'm like, okay, we just got it. I don't even care. I don't need them to cover. I just need them to move on here. And so normally, like I did last night, I would just sort of sit back and go, okay, Kansas just win. Like, let's get out of here. But this Miami team, I think, is dangerous. I talked about having either USC or Miami as the team that was going to make the regional final as the sort of double-digit seed, sleeper, whatever stylistic type of thing. Now, St. Peter's has come and stolen that valor, so to speak, and it ended up being Miami, who won by 2 points against USC. So, like, that was the closest game that Miami's had to deal with. So I don't think I was way off in thinking it was going to be one of those two teams. This could easily be USC. And so I just have this fear. Again, I think the number is fair. The number had to be 6.5. And I understand why it's moving down, because people like me are like, I don't trust Bill Self to cover a decent sized spread at this point, because they just haven't really done that all season long. And you saw that whether it was Remy Martin's missing free throws down the stretch, Providence running the cover play at the end of the game just to take the layups and to ensure the cover. Like, I'm not willing to lay 6.5 with Kansas at this point, and this will be the last time you'll sort of have that decision to make. And so I'm taking a little bit off of that futures position and taking plus 6.5. And honestly, if I didn't have that futures position in play, I'd still bet the plus 6.5, which is why I can sort of say that as a bet. And I might even have a little on the money line if I was so, if I was a true neutral going into this game. But Miami plus 6.5 is the only bet that I've got so far.
Yeah, we talked about it at the top of the podcast. Kansas is also 18-18 this season against the spread. No consistency, and they failed to cover against Creighton, and they failed to cover I don't even remember. Providence. Yeah, Providence. And just slow starts, and they can't seem to pull away against these teams that they are better than. So,
and that was the thing throughout the year, right? It was like Kansas was a 10-point favorite or an 8-point favorite throughout the Big 12 schedule. Yeah. And it was always like, oh, they won by 4, they won by 6, something along those lines, right? Where it's like, oh, they went to overtime against TCU or Texas or some of these teams. And it's like, yeah, they won. And so they end up getting themselves that 1 seed. But it was like, I don't really want to lay points with this team at any point in time. And that's certainly not starting tomorrow.
Yeah. Sheldon, what's your best bet for this Elite Eight?
So I'm going to say this. It pains me because, I mean, I came on our pod when we were doing the Sweet 16 picks, and Purdue was, 12.5-point favorites against St. Peter's. And I was like, listen, who's pretending to know anything about St. Peter's? I'm taking the 12.5 points just based off of that. Like, it was sometimes my analysis is just that simple. Okay. I'm not out here trying to fool anybody. I'm honestly saying it's St. Peter's. Like, who's actually going to tell us something about St. Peter's? And when you add in, their coach at the end of the game, where he's just like, he's so hyped up and so passionate. What are they going to say about us now? You're just looking at that and you're like, I mean, what can we say? Do you know what I'm like? They made this epic, crazy run.
Yeah, but isn't that
you look at this game and it's
like,
8.
That's a coach.
No, I was just going to say
who's talked his team into thinking that like people don't like them. Whereas on the outside, everybody's like going bananas and has nothing negative to say about St. Peter's. And it's like,
for sure,
if you can't acknowledge that the school of 2,400 people who didn't bring cheerleaders because they did not have 4, or they have only 4 cheerleaders, and that's not enough to qualify for the stipend or whatever to send cheerleaders. They didn't have enough cheerleaders to bring to the tournament. I'm sorry, man, you're an underdog, and that's not an insult. And it's like, man, if betting's allowed in New Jersey, is he getting down on these games? Like, is his family getting down? Because they should be, but you can tell like a really good coach is the type who's going to trick his team, so to speak, into thinking that people are saying negative things. Where's the negative things that are being said? Like, what are we saying now? Like, we're saying the same stuff. Like, everybody's enjoying this, even those of us who may have had Kentucky to win the title and, should be bitter about this. Like, I'm having fun with it, right? Like, I've lost a couple of bets along the way, but like, no one's having any negative vibes towards this team. Like, find me the clips who are like, St. Peter's is awful. It's like, no, man, like 2 seed in the MAC, like, obviously, I don't know what would have happened if they had faced Iona and Rick Pitino's squad that was the heavy favorite in that conference. We may never sort of hear of them, again or even at all. And then maybe this is a Rick Pitino Iona team that's going on this run. And then now we get to say maybe some negative things about the Cinderella team. But that's not what's happening here with Shaheen Holloway, right? Like,
no.
And good for him, man, for making it look like it's them against the world. Even though you look at the betting splits, right? It's the world and St. Peter's all in this together on this run, certainly in the last couple of games.
Yeah, everyone jumped on the 12.5. I think seeing the splits, there was a majority of people on that line. And I think that at 8.5, I just can't do that with St. Peter's in this matchup, because I just think the matchup against North Carolina wants to get up and down and play that style with them, and it's not going to go well for St. Peter's. And 8.5 is a weird line, right? Because as you just said, I mean, look at the line, what it was against Kentucky. Look at the line, like Purdue and North Carolina are not the same team, right? Like, we could just say that. And I feel like college basketball comes down to the stylistic play so much. And I just think North Carolina, that might be too much of a buzzsaw, but I really like Miami as well. I just think the way that I'm huge on guard play, and I'm always going to ride or die with guard play. I think that this whole Kansas thing and Bill Self, like, we've seen this story before. I'm not saying they're going to lose, but we've seen this story before. I'll just say that much. But overall, I think if I'm lacing bets, we're just walking towards Duke versus North Carolina, right? So that's how this is going to go down. And St. Peter's, you guys had a really good run. I'm happy for y'all. Cool, but y'all are about to get blown out by North Carolina. So take the 8.5 points. I'll lay the 8.5 points, which is not something that I would normally like to do, but it's been a good time, St. Peter's.
And it's funny how like these 3 games have gone for St. Peter's, right? Like, I mean, you probably should have seen that coming, because the theme, I think, of this entire tournament is the more things change, the more they stay the same. Like, you know, the predictability of the Rick Barnes flame out, the predictability of, you know, if you want to predict that Gonzaga was going to lose to a sort of tougher team, so to speak, right? A lot of thematic stuff that has just kind of stayed the same. And it's like, Matt Painter and Purdue getting knocked out when they probably shouldn't have, kind of a thing that happens all the time, right? And like, yeah, it didn't happen to them against a really bad Yale team. And listen, I bet Texas in that second round game. Nobody told me that Purdue was going to get 30 more free throw attempts. If they had, I would not have made that bet, but nobody was ready to see that coming. Like, where were the free throws yesterday? I mean, I guess St. Peter's, despite having the same size disadvantage that Texas had, I guess St. Peter's was just less handsy than the Longhorns. I don't know, right? And so I look at it and I go, that first game against Kentucky, you know, you look at the shot quality metrics, and it was like they should have lost that game by 20. Like, Kentucky blew that game. And then the next game is like, okay, St. Peter's plays a really good game and beats Murray State. And obviously both teams coming off of an overtime game. But like, okay, that's cool. Maybe the Murray State coach had one foot out the door as far as getting a bigger job. Not that Holloway doesn't. I think he's probably already, you know, at Seton Hall in half the time this past week anyway. And so I look at it and I go, okay, like that was pretty good. And then I look, okay, Purdue, like what, you know, just watch that game and you're like, they're doing nothing here to gain any kind of advantage for themselves. And so it wasn't a fluke yesterday. The shot quality sort of showed, okay, this game was a very close sort of 50-50 type game. So it wasn't the same thing as the Kentucky game. So you can't call yesterday's game a fluke, but again, you can call the one against Kentucky a fluke from a matchup and sort of metric result standpoint. And so they survived that and they took advantage of that, but it doesn't mean that they are this infallible, you know, sort of pixie dust thing. You know, they got pretty lucky against Kentucky, and then they beat a Murray State team that, you know, they can beat. I mean, it's crazy, by the way, that Murray State and North Carolina are the same point spreads against St. Peter's. Again, another indicator here that I just, you know, you can't tell me that North Carolina against Murray State at this point in time, like North Carolina wouldn't be favored by 2 or 3 points in that game, right? Yeah. So you see this line moving up 8.5 here. I think that's a pretty good indicator. But again, I would have said the same thing, you know, with that Purdue game as that thing closed 13 on last night, I guess. What?
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for coming on. Tips are what, 6 hours away? It's 5 hours away now. What's your guys' podcast schedule next week? And any plugs for yourselves where your work can be found as we head into the Final Four?
We're going to be doing pods on Monday and Thursday this upcoming week. And yeah, definitely super excited about what's about to go down today. It's just been a lot of fun. Another great year. The tournament unpredictability is why the tournament is always so fun. And also just, you know, as Matt said, there's things that you look for that are themes each and every year. And that's Ricky Barnes. That's Coach Cal. It's Bruce Pearl. Like, there's just things that you can see coming a mile away. And then when you just have performances and seeing how people, you know, you mentioned Banchero and how like people like he's the best thing ever. And then I don't know, I'm not too sure about him. And then you watch the end of the last game and you're like, oh, he's amazing. He's going to be great. And it's just like the waves that people go on from game to game in the tournament. That to me is what makes it so much fun each year in and year out. So yeah, we're going to obviously, you know, be setting up the Final Four, and that's going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm on Twitter, Shell Alexander, Instagram, Sheldon Alexander. And yeah, we do the DRF Sports Pod twice a week. Check us out wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I can't wait for this. We didn't even talk about it. This Houston Villanova game. Is that something you guys might be interested in tonight? Wow, like I'm fired up about that game.
Give me Houston.
I don't have
Give me Houston all day.
Game starts. I'm not in the business of fading Jay Wright when you're getting points. That's not my thing. I was on Houston first game. I was on Houston the second game. I was on Houston the third game. Right, like I've been riding them. My biggest bet of the season was Houston over Arizona this past week. Here's the thing though, in every one of their games, I'm going to say every single game they played the entire season, but in a lot of their games, right, it seems like they're the better team. And then you find that like it's somehow really close in the second half, right? Illinois was tied with Houston. We forget about that because that game ended like 15-point spread. That game was awfully close about halfway through the second half. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait and see, because if Villanova is hitting their threes and they take a big lead or something along those lines, like, okay, maybe I don't want anything to do with this game at all. But if this game's close with about 10 minutes to go, I'm going to rely on Houston, who seems to wear their opponents down, which is going to happen when you crash the offensive glass the way they do and make you play 40, 50 seconds of defense every second possession, right? Like that's obviously a thing that's going to be a problem for Villanova. They're not a particularly good rebounding team, but Villanova's going to do all of that stuff. Shell and I always kind of say, like, in the dark corners, right? They're going to do that extra stuff. They're going to do things the right way to hang in this game. But is that over 30 minutes? If the offensive rebound totals are where we think they might be, where they have been these last few games, I'm going to want to live bet Houston in the second half. So it's a very wait and see approach, but a very sort of under 12 timeout. Let's see if this game's close. Maybe if Houston's down a couple of points, maybe even if they're up a couple of points, that's where I'm looking to come in, because Houston's best 10 minutes. You can go back to the American Athletic Conference tournament, right? Against Memphis. They had a big lead. It tightened up. I think they got down to about 5, something along those lines in the second half. Game ends and it's like, oh, they won a 16. And they did that a couple of different ways, and they did that a ton over the course of the regular season. They were the only team that I was willing to make bets on at a -15 type of a price point, because they would be able to pull away in the second half from these inferior teams. And they weren't rated kind of askew the way that Gonzaga has been rated, right? And that's why, Gonzaga is number 1 rated team. Okay, they get the number 1 seed. Houston, the number 5 rated team going into the tournament, or number 4, something along those lines. Like, no, they get a 5 seed. They get treated like they are a top 16 to 20 type of a team, when in reality, they have always been a top 5 team, which has allowed us to take advantage of that value up until this point. But now you're talking about Jay Wright as an underdog. And so I'm just backing it up here a little bit. I'm going to rely on Houston to be good in the last 10 minutes, assuming that they can do the things they do to tire out the Villanova Wildcats.
Love that. I love that live betting strategy. Not often do we talk live betting strategy on this podcast, but I think that's a really, really good point. If Houston is close late, they'll probably win. Although I am high on Houston. I just wrote a betting preview for them. Am I buying into the analytics? Is Ken Palm influencing me in my thought process? Probably, but I was with you. I had Houston beating Arizona, so he hasn't failed me now.
No, of course not.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. Check out the DRF Sports Podcast wherever you find podcasts. Also on YouTube, and follow Matt and Sheldon on Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. I know Matt pumping out some great stuff from the Score as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, boys.
You have a great day.
Take care, guys.
Live betting. I love that idea.
It's a
stock market.
Some good strategy there. Rapid fire best bets.
Yes. You ready?
Yeah. Let's do it. You go first. Sure? You have to go first this time.
Are you sure you're ready for this?
Yes, sir. Houston.
All right. Today, give me Houston -3.
Okay.
As we just talked about live betting them, that's probably the best strategy. But you know what? I'm in love with Kelvin Sampson. What's his name? Ken Palm has led me astray.
What's his name? Come on. Our king, Ken Palm.
I was doing 3 things. I was writing in my notebook.
Fair enough.
Come on, man. Okay, so Houston -3. Give me that. I'm staying away from Arkansas Duke entirely.
Okay.
I'm also taking the under 128 in the Houston Villanova game.
Sure.
Because I just think, they're both very efficient offenses, but they're both also pretty serviceable. Houston's one of the best defenses in the nation. Villanova, I think, is like 45th in terms of defensive efficiency. They just play at such a slow tempo that I don't know if they're going to get to 60 point. I could see this being like a 55-50 type of game. And at that point, you're cash the under with plenty of points to spare. Tomorrow, I love Miami +6. Love Miami +6. I don't think they're going to win, but I think they can keep it within 4 or 5 late in the game. And with fantastic guard play with Charlie Moore leading the ship, and Isaiah
Wong.
He's really good.
Yeah.
I want to bet St. Peter's plus 8.5, mainly because I just want to be a peacock for the day. However, here's the thing with that. Baycott is a fantastic big. He's a much better big than what Travion Williams is and what Zach Edey is. He knows how to use his body. He's a rebounding machine, averages 9 rebounds a game. Pair that with Brady Manick, who can stretch the floor. UNC likes to run. That's the only way St. Peter's can really beat them. I haven't really seen St. Peter's run full court press a lot of a game. I think in order to do that, they're going to have to play a high pressure defense and force UNC to potentially get trapped in the backcourt, get turnovers that way. Kind of like what Baylor did in the second half against UNC during that comeback. Baylor also benefited from some very questionable calls that went against UNC and none that went against them. So I think St. Peter's plus 8.5 is a fun play. I'm not going to include it in my best bets. There's just too much volatility surrounding that game.
That seems fair to me. I like that logic. You ready?
Hit me with your best bets, Bennett.
All right. Well, I think Houston's scaring me now the more I look at it, but I'll say Houston minus 2.5 because I said that earlier somewhere, so I'll stick with it. I'll take that. And I'm going to give – I've been so horrible this tournament that the way to get back, as many of us know, is just to chase, right? You just give as many bets as you can.
Are you going to pick every game and then the total for every game?
Yes. So that's what we're doing. Not placing all of these. I think it's important to note I'm giving them as best bets for the show, and I'll let you know if any of them really stick out. I think Arkansas is the one that I'll play the spread.
Follow Bennett on Twitter at Bennett Conlon to follow along with all of his plays.
All of my plays. So I'll have Houston minus 2.5, and I'm going to tail you. I'm going to take the under as well. I think that's the right side there. We'll take Arkansas spread. I'm seeing it plus 4. I know it's probably some different spots somewhere else, but I'll take Arkansas spread as well as the over in that game, over 147.5. Arkansas and Duke. I think it could be a little bit of a shootout. Arkansas is due to make some shots, so we're sticking with that. Tomorrow, we're going to go with Kansas minus 6. I like the matchup.
You're fading me.
Yeah, I like the matchup. I'm fading pretty much everyone on the podcast.
Yeah, we all are on Miami.
Which is sure to go well. I just don't know the matchup for him, so I'll take that. And I'm also going to take the over of 147 in that game. I think there could be some scoring. Feels high. I feel like a lot of people are going to like the under there. We'll take the over. And then St. Peter's, North Carolina, we are going to take the under 137. And we are going to take St. Peter's plus 8.
You're taking St. Peter's plus 8?
That's a hard play. That's a hard play there. I think the issue is if I have Arkansas covering, I need Duke to win by 1 to put the pressure on North Carolina, which could then lead to that. I'll also be tempted looking there at a little half. Actually, let me change that. Give me St. Peter's. I'm seeing plus 4.5 first half. Do that instead of the plus 8. Because I think they can link
plus 4.5 first half. Something that will be really interesting to watch. This is the first game that St. Peter's is playing against another team that's playing with house money. Like Purdue was a national title favorite. Murray State's like the mid-major that has all the hopes. And then Kentucky's a national title favorite too. So once you get down to St. Peter's, you tense up. You're missing your shots. You're playing nervous. UNC's not doing that. UNC's an 8 seed playing with house money that essentially made the NCAA tournament by beating Duke at Cameron Indoor. I think that's going to be a huge factor that people aren't really talking about. Is just the fact that both of these teams are playing completely loose, playing with house money. And this is the first time St. Peter's is playing a team that isn't under tremendous pressure to win.
If Duke beats Arkansas, I think North Carolina has more pressure to win that game than any team St. Peter's has played.
Do you think they care?
I think they could still play freely, but I don't think it's like house money. Like if you have a chance to play Duke in the NCAA tournament for the first time in Carolina's history, and you lose to a 15 seed that starting center is like 6'7", 190, and you're like Armando Baycott, like I don't know how you live that down. I think there'd be pressure. Now, if it's Arkansas and you have no pressure there, and then you're playing a 15 seed, I think you're probably going to come out pretty free. So that's why I'm a little scared of the bet. But if Duke wins and Arkansas covers, we can really get perfectly in the weeds here. But I still think there's a little pressure on North Carolina because like they're different than like if Memphis was an 8 seed, or Memphis was the 8-9, right? But if Memphis is in that area, but for them, like if they had gotten to that point, I think they'd be playing pretty free. Some of the other 8-9s at TCU, maybe if they had gotten by Arizona. Carolina's got that history where it's like if you lose to a 15 seed and you don't make a Final Four, oh, they're not hanging any banner for you. There's no Elite 8 banner going up. So I think there's still some pressure, but to your point, Carolina looks super free. Like they're maxing out their potential right now, it looks like.
Yeah. All right. Bennett, you want to plug anything that you got coming out, anything like that?
Yeah, you can follow my stuff. My Twitter's at Bennett Conlon. Got the handle listed on the screen. Sportshandle.com is where a lot of my writing will go. Got some interesting Arkansas stuff coming down the pipeline. They have like one sports book that you can use on like browsers, web browsers, but not an iOS app yet. Another casino said they were going to launch. Saracen Casino said they were going to launch their mobile app in Arkansas by March Madness. Arkansas is in the Elite 8. That app is not up. So if Arkansas beats Duke, it's kind of a race to see if they can get that thing up by the time the Final Four hits. Otherwise, there are going to be some angry Arkansas residents, I think.
That's my favorite subplot to all of this. Whenever we talk, it's always, so how's that Arkansas app coming? Best subplot to March Madness. People aren't talking about it enough. You know, this is March. We sleep in May. John Rothstein's not out here tweeting about an Arkansas app.
He is not. He should be, but he's not.
He should be. He was tweeting about his layover, his delay.
That became almost the storyline of March, but it seemed like he made it to a TV in time to see the games.
Thank goodness that John Rothstein did not miss a minute of March. Well, for Bennett Conlon, my name's Jack Fitzpatrick. Thank you guys for tuning in to the DRF College Sports Podcast. We'll be back next Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, breaking down all things Final Four. What's your Final Four right now? Go.
Okay, it'll be different. I guess it won't be different than I think it'll end up being Duke, Houston, Duke, Kansas, North Carolina, which would be sweet. That's kind of like also what I would like to have happen. Like if Miami sneaks through, it's like it's cool, but then are we going to watch like Villanova or Houston, Miami? So anyway, I'll say it's Houston, and then you'll have Kansas on that side. Houston, Kansas playing for a spot in the national title game, and then Duke, North Carolina, which is what I want. I am betting Arkansas though, because I feel like it's maybe too public a thought at this point.
Okay. I like Duke, St. Peter's just for fun, just for fun. I think they also have a potential maybe. So Duke, St. Peter's, Houston, Kansas.
And then you got St. Peter's, Kansas is your national title.
Houston,
I will say if
Houston, St. Peter's, I got Houston, St. Peter's in my national championship.
There would be St. Peter's is up there if they win. I've seen a lot of people that are like St. Peter's making the Elite 8 is like the best sports story ever. It's like pump the brakes a little bit there. Like there have been a lot of really impressive sports stories.
I guess there are a lot of impressive sports. Of recent memory of the last like 3 to 5 years, I would say this is a top 2 sports story.
It's a great one, but it's different than like they haven't won the title. You know what I mean?
I would say Tiger winning the Masters is probably still better than this.
That's incredible. I don't know how to pronounce it. What was the team that was like 5,000 to 1? The soccer team was like
Stir City.
Yeah, City. That was a crazy one where they won the whole thing, though, right?
North Macedonia knocking Italy out of the World Cup.
Sure.
It was qualifying. Italy was playing North Macedonia. North Macedonia in extra time with plus 5 minutes left, and like it was like 0-0, and they scored a goal and which beat Italy. And I don't know if they qualified for the World Cup, but Italy now has not qualified for the World Cup the last 2 World Cups, first time in the country's history.
See, that's crazy. There are a lot of ones that I feel like are getting a little overshadowed, prisoner of the moment stuff, where it's pretty cool, but it's like one of the wins was Murray State. One of the wins was also a mid-major.
I can't believe you're discrediting Murray State.
Incredible. It's
on them all season.
It's an incredible run for St. Peter's, but people saying that it's like the best sports story ever. It's like, have you never seen Miracle on Ice? Have you never seen Rudy?
Have you ever seen Field of Dreams?
Yeah, Field of Dreams is one of the more. Air Bud too is one that really doesn't get talked about enough.
Fun fact about Bennett before we get up on out of here. He wrote a paper on how Air Bud was the best athlete ever.
Yeah, we had a class that was ranking the top 100 athletes, and I put Air Bud in there, and I can't remember if he actually ended up sticking. There was some anti-dog bias in the class that was repulsive, but
Yeah, pro cat bias. You know how it is. It's
Yeah, I
just
think
politics.
Tiger Woods must have been top 10 then with the pro cat bias.
All right. For Bennett, my name's Jack Fitzpatrick. Thank you guys for tuning in. See you on Tuesday night. See ya.